Johnny Carson was known for his sharp wit and charming persona on The Tonight Show, but behind his easygoing demeanor, there were moments that revealed a more critical side. His famous king of late-night status did not come without moments of drama. Carson, like many stars of his caliber, had his share of feuds with other celebrities, especially musicians. What's more intriguing than a tale of what went on behind the scenes? Stay tuned as we reveal the 7 guitarists Johnny Carson had trouble with. You will not believe who made the list. Before we dive into video, please subscribe our channel. Johnny Carson's reign as the host of The Tonight Show was legendary, but his interactions with musicians often extended beyond professional encounters. In a time when talk shows were the beating heart of American television, Carson had a unique ability to connect with a wide array of guests, ranging from movie stars to rock legends. However, like any public figure, he had his conflicts. Some musicians, particularly guitarists, rubbed him the wrong way during appearances on the show. These encounters did not always play out in front of the cameras, but rumors and backstage stories often pointed to tension between Carson and certain musical icons. Despite his genial public image, Carson's relationships with certain guitarists were strained due to personal differences, disagreements over performance style, or even political clashes. As one of the most influential figures in entertainment history, Carson's opinions about musicians could shape or break their public reputation. Behind the curtain, the stories of his feuds with these rock and roll stars became just as iconic as the music itself. Now we talk about 7 names he disliked the most. Number 1. Jimi Hendrix. When Jimi Hendrix made his way to The Tonight Show in the late 1960s, he was already a rock legend. His innovative guitar, playing and explosive performances made him a global icon. However, his appearance on Carson's stage didn't quite go as smoothly as fans would expect. Although Carson admired Hendrix's talent, there was tension behind the scenes. Hendrix's unpredictability and wild behavior often clashed with Carson's more controlled, polished persona. The late-night host, known for his quick wit and professional demeanor, wasn't always thrilled by the chaotic energy that came with Jimi's presence. On one infamous occasion, Hendrix's impromptu guitar antics threw off the timing of the show's well-organized schedule. Carson, a stickler for precision, wasn't used to his show's flow being interrupted by unscripted moments. While the audience was certainly entertained by Hendrix's guitar mastery, Carson's irritation was palpable as the performance went on longer than expected. It wasn't just the music that caused friction. Hendrix's late-night antics and his apparent disinterest in formalities didn't sit well with Carson. Despite their differences, Carson never outright criticized Hendrix on air, but the tension between the two was undeniable. Their dynamic reflected the growing divide between the mainstream, polished entertainment world Carson embodied and the countercultural revolution Hendrix represented. In private, Carson reportedly considered Hendrix a bit too unpredictable for his late-night brand, and their encounters were often described as awkward and strained, leaving fans wondering just how much the king of late night truly admired the revolutionary guitarist. Number 2. Keith Richards. Keith Richards, the iconic guitarist of the Rolling Stones, was no stranger to controversy, and his relationship with Johnny Carson was no exception. Richards was known for his rebellious persona and his wild rock and roll lifestyle, which didn't always align with Carson's more polished late-night environment. While Carson often enjoyed a good bit of banter with his musical guests, Richards' infamous disregard for convention made him a particularly difficult guest on The Tonight Show. On one memorable occasion, Richards appeared on Carson's show with the Stones during the height of their fame in the 1970s. Carson, who usually kept things light and humorous, seemed visibly thrown off by Richards' aloof attitude and lack of interest in the scripted format of the show. While Carson tried to steer the conversation with his usual blend of charm and wit, Richards' responses were often curt or nonchalant, making for an uncomfortable exchange. The rock star's disinterest in participating in the usual small talk with the host became a point of tension, and the segment quickly lost its energy. It's not that Carson didn't respect Richards' musical talent, quite the opposite. He recognized the importance of the Rolling Stones in shaping rock music. However, Richards' anti-establishment attitude and his tendency to be uncooperative made him one of the more challenging musical guests in Carson's late-night empire. Behind the scenes, the vibe was often strained, as Richards' free-spirited nature clashed with Carson's precise and professional approach. For Carson, Richards wasn't just a guitar legend. He was a reminder of the cultural shift that was happening in the entertainment world, one that often left him feeling uncomfortable. Number 3. Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, a name synonymous with revolutionizing music, was another musician whose relationship with Joe, Carson had its share of tensions. Dylan's enigmatic persona and often cryptic nature made him a difficult guest on The Tonight Show. While Carson typically connected easily with his guests, Dylan was a different breed, aloof, unpredictable, and not always interested in the usual late-night banter. When Dylan appeared on Carson's show in the early 1970s, it was a big deal. The folk singer turned rock icon was at the peak of his career, and his presence on a mainstream platform like Carson's was both a statement and an anomaly. Carson, with his charming yet controlled style, seemed slightly out of his element as he tried to engage Dylan in conversation. Dylan, however, appeared uninterested in the scripted nature of the show, often providing short, evasive answers that left Carson struggling for the right follow-up. While it's well documented that Dylan was never one for interviews, the awkwardness during his Carson appearance went beyond the typical shyness many artists exhibited. Dylan's refusal to engage in friendly exchanges or lighthearted chat created an uncomfortable atmosphere on set. The public may have seen the performance and interview as a historic moment, but behind the scenes, Carson reportedly found it challenging to connect with Dylan, especially when the guests seemed to reject the idea of conventional showbiz camaraderie. Despite the tension, Carson continued to respect Dylan's genius as a musician, understanding that Dylan's mystique was part of what made him so special. But when it came to their interactions on air, it was clear that Dylan's anti-interview, anti-press attitude left Carson frustrated and uneasy, making their relationship a complex one. Number 4. Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page, the legendary guitarist of Led Zeppelin, is another rock icon whose interactions with Johnny Carson were far from smooth. Page, known for his virtuosity and intrica to guitar work, was also infamous for his mysterious and sometimes elusive personality. When he appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson found himself up against the same challenge he faced with other rock stars. Page wasn't a man of many words, unlike many of his contemporaries who were eager to promote their latest projects or engage in light banter. Page wasn't particularly interested in discussing his career or personal life with Carson. His stoic, almost silent demeanor on air created a stark contrast to Carson's usual energetic and conversational approach. On one notable occasion, Carson attempted to steer the conversation with humor and curiosity, only to be met with Page's cool, distant responses. The tension was palpable, and it made for an awkward exchange that didn't connect with the audience the way Carson had hoped. Despite his renowned status in the rock world, Page's resistance to the traditional interview format made him a difficult guest. Carson, known for his ability to draw out his guests, was at a loss as Page kept his answers brief and rarely strayed from his guarded persona. For Carson, who prided himself on creating engaging and enjoyable TV moments, Page's coldness was a challenge he didn't face with many other stars. It wasn't that Page was rude, he simply wasn't interested in the media circus that Carson often represented. In the end, their dynamic was a reminder of the disconnect that sometimes occurred between the rock and roll world and the traditional entertainment business, leaving both Carson and his audience frustrated by Page's aloofness. Number 5. Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton, widely regarded as one of the greatest guitarists of all time, had a rather strained relationship with Johnny Carson. Clapton's musical genius is undeniable, but when it came to his appearances on The Tonight Show, his interactions with Carson were often awkward and uncomfortable. Clapton, who had a reputation for being introverted and private, wasn't always the most engaging guest, making it difficult for Carson, who thrived on witty exchanges and personal stories, to establish a rapport. Their most notable encounter occurred during Clapton's 1970s appearance, at a time when the guitarist was battling personal demons. Clapton, still reeling from his struggles with addiction and heartbreak, didn't show much enthusiasm when Carson tried to connect. The interview quickly turned one-sided, with Carson trying to draw out some of Clapton's more personal thoughts, but the guitarist was distant, responding in short, emotionless sentences. The audience, who expected the usual engaging banter, could sense the tension and awkwardness in the room. Carson, who was used to being in control of the conversation, seemed perplexed by Clapton's reluctance to open up. It became clear that Clapton's reluctance to share details about his life wasn't a slight against Carson, but rather a reflection of his personal struggles. Carson, though understanding on some level, didn't have the patience for the kind of aloofness Clapton brought to the stage. Despite their differences, Clapton's musical talent was undeniable, and Carson respected him as an artist. However, their interviews left much to be desired, and Clapton's discomfort on set only highlighted the complexities of bringing a rock star with such a guarded nature onto a mainstream talk show. The connection Carson sought was never fully realized. Number 6. Pete Townshend. Pete Townshend, the dynamic guitarist and driving force behind The Who, was another musician who didn't quite mesh with Johnny Carson's late-night format. Townshend, known for his explosive stage presence and his deep involvement in both music and social commentary, was often more candid and outspoken than the traditional late-night guest. While Carson was adept at managing talk show interviews, Townshend's strong opinion, ions, and occasional unpredictability made their interactions more challenging. On one particular appearance in the 1970s, Townshend's outspoken nature clashed with Carson's desire to keep things light and entertaining. Townshend, ever the intellectual and a fierce critic of societal norms, had little interest in the typical pleasantries of Hollywood. His discussion on The Tonight Show veered into topics of music and politics, leaving Carson scrambling to steer the conversation back into familiar late-night territory. The difference in their conversational styles created an uncomfortable dynamic that was difficult to resolve. Townshend's comments, particularly his critiques of mainstream culture and the music industry, often put him at odds with Carson's more polished and commercial sensibilities. At one point, when Carson tried to ask a light-hearted question, Townshend responded with a biting remark about the state of the music business, sending an unintended ripple of discomfort through the studio. The audience, not accustomed to such frankness on a talk show, seemed unsure of how to react. While Carson respected Townshend's musicianship and revolutionary contributions to rock, the interview felt more like a clash of personalities. Townshend's refusal to toe the line and his unfiltered approach to discussing serious issues were at odds with Carson's goal of delivering entertainment that was smooth and accessible. This made their interactions some of the more uncomfortable ones on The Tonight Show. Number 7. Slash, the legendary guitarist of Guns N' Roses, brought an undeniable energy to rock music, but his appearance on The Tonight Show wasn't as harmonious as his shredding guitar solos. Known for his iconic top hat, long hair, and rebellious attitude, Slash was the epitome of rock and roll. However, his interactions with Johnny Carson often revealed a subtle tension that made their exchanges more awkward than expected. When Slash appeared on Carson's show in the early 1990s, he was already an international rock star, known for his wild performances and no-nonsense persona. Carson, whose show had a reputation for hosting lighthearted, entertaining interviews, found himself up against Slash's famously guarded nature. Unlike many of the charismatic musicians who thrived in front of Carson's cameras, Slash wasn't always keen on participating in the usual celebrity banter. On air, Slash was notoriously quiet, offering only monosyllabic answers and rarely engaging in the friendly back and forth that Carson was known for. This left Carson scrambling to maintain the rhythm of the interview. Carson, who was adept at reading his guests and drawing them into conversation, struggled to break through Slash's cool, almost aloof demeanor. The guitarist, while clearly talented and charismatic in his own right, seemed uninterested in indulging the audience's desire for personal stories or lighthearted chat. Off-camera, Carson reportedly didn't have much more success. Slash's tendency to keep his personal life private and his disinterest in media appearances made him a difficult guest to connect with. Though Carson respected Slash's musical ability and influence on the rock genre, their interactions remained distant, making Slash one of the more enigmatic and hard-to-read guests on The Tonight Show.